Welcome everybody into another episode from Coinage here, coming to you live from our Brooklyn studios in New York City. I'm the host of Coinage, Zach Usman. Excited for another chat from the only community-owned media DAO backed by the co-founder of Netflix. Excited for the conversation today because we don't often talk about a project that I use, not all the time anyways, but I do use this one, and excited. You may have heard of our guest as the prior founder of a little reservation platform known as Resy, and or the food media organization called Eater. But today, you will not know him by those names. You will know him as the founder of the most interesting Web3 project in the food space. Ben Leventhal, the founder of Blackbird, joins us today on Coinage. Ben, thanks so much for taking the time, man.
For sure. Good morning.
It's not every day you really see kind of a utility-based project pop up in one that you can explain to people who are not deep in Web3. And I think that it's an important kind of space to be playing in. So if you're just joining us, we've got the founder of Blackbird, Ben Leventhal, with us on Coinage. And Ben, one of the things too that I think is pretty interesting is, I downloaded the app during on-chain summer. Coinage also partnered with Base for our big activation just a couple weeks ago. And I think that that's a huge element just when it comes to mobile and usability and the idea of everyone having this in their pocket for whatever restaurant they want to go to. I mean, what have you seen in terms of the users for Blackbird? Are most of them coming over from Web3, or is it a good mix between, I hate using the term. I don't want to use the term. I'm not going to say normies. I just said normies. But people coming in from Web2 versus people coming in from Web3, what have you seen and what do you expect to see?
Look, we love our Web3 community, but this is a product built for people who love restaurants, whether they're Web 2, Web 3, or Web 16. It doesn't matter to me, frankly, from a product standpoint that it's Web 3. I think we tend to talk about Web 3 as the steak à poivre when actually it's just the grill. And that we have to sort of understand that, and that's okay that it's technology and not consumer product. But that's really, to me, the reality of it. We have to build a magical consumer product first and foremost and full stop. And then we can worry about, how we're using technology to power it. You could call that a kind of chicken and egg question. To me, consumer product, magical consumer product is the magic, is the key to any successful technology company that you expect consumers to adopt. So we don't really think about it as a Web3 consumer versus a Web2 consumer. But what I will say, for what it's worth, I think in terms of early adoption, a lot of adoption is coming from people who love the restaurants that we're partnering with. Anton's and Nat's, two in the West Village that are near to where I live, and Upside Pizza and Gertie's and lots of others. And those people are part of our sort of early adopters. And then there are definitely people from the Web3 community, and it is certainly exciting to see them sort of a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of understanding where we're headed. They're really excited about Fly and Points and and they understand the mechanics of sort of being rewarded for showing up early. And so they have really sort of, with great enthusiasm, been checking in and engaging with the platform and using the platform because they know that the points they earn today, the points per check-in is going to be a lot higher than it will be in 5 years. So we've seen those consumers and also just restaurant lovers.
Yeah, I feel like, that's a huge piece of, I guess, what the internet's enabled. And you've seen kind of the huge explosion from before when you were, working on Eater and Resy, this idea of, how does technology start to revolutionize all kinds of sectors, right? It doesn't just need to be SaaS companies that are in play here. It's using technology in restaurant tech or actually helping a mom and pop shop get off the ground. And, we saw that and you built it. And I'm curious to kind of get your take on what Web3 revolutionizes when you start to apply these things to these models, because specifically, like you just mentioned, I feel like, your guys' roadmap, you're really leaning on New York, at least to start, and now you're looking at other cities to expand into. How has that maybe been different than if you had launched this product, and I suppose you maybe couldn't have in the Web3 sense maybe 10 years ago, but I do feel like there is maybe a niche, a capability right now when it comes to what we saw with social media and the idea of having media outlets cater to a very specific kind of fan. And now you've got this capability where you can really hone in on specific markets like you guys have in New York to start. How does that maybe change the game plan and the roadmap in the way that you've built Blackbird to start?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is all around community. I think what really, to me in the last 3 years, if there is one thing to take away from Web3 and what if there's one thing that's more exciting than everything else in terms of Web3 and the promise of Web3, I think for sure it is the power of Web3 to build communities, and that maps very closely to what great restaurants do, and that build communities. So I would say the way that, sort of a practical way, from a product standpoint, the way that we are informed by the evolution of Web3 is that we are thinking very critically and purposefully about how do we unlock those existing Web3 communities for the restaurant industry. I think that over time, Blackbird, as part of its value add, will be an expert in unlocking the right communities for the right restaurants. We certainly see all of these very enthusiastic and pretty tight communities in Web3. And we're really spending time talking about, thinking about, and talking to them about how can we unlock restaurants for this community? How can
Hmm.
we be a conduit, a connector between your community and the world of physical restaurants.
Let me push that a little bit further too, because I'm intrigued by that, because it's something that led us to founding Coinage over here. Because my background also came from being an anchor at Yahoo and CNBC before that, and the idea there being, I saw a lot of people, in those communities, whether it was Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever, kind of really sharing things in that community. It was all online, digitally native communities. And, the idea there being, look, we can leverage a lot of that enthusiasm and excitement by hosting a crypto show. And this was back in 2018. I got laughed out of the room. So it never happened. But I still think that, that's why we're doing this here, is because you've got huge Solana fans, you got huge Ether fans, you got huge Bitcoin, whatever it may be, and you can tap into it. So if I'm understanding that correctly, are you saying that you kind of want to tap into, you might be a huge, I don't know, chicken parm guy, and let me tell you about the chicken parms at these restaurants, and like get real granular when it comes to the data? Like, should we be thinking about Blackbird more as a curation and community platform, or like how are you thinking about leveraging some of that community aspect in restaurants?
Yeah, I mean, look, that would be interesting for sure if we're getting down to sort of being a matchmaker for chicken parm fans. Um, That's actually one where I would say Google's pretty good. But,
Hmm.
for example, we're having what you've seen VFriends do in terms of build their community. Gary's obviously my co-founder on Resy and an investor in Blackbird and dear friend. And so, we're having an exciting conversation with those guys about how could we point VFriends at restaurants. These are for the most part people who are excited about, cutting edge things. They're excited about content. They're Gary fans. So what can we do for them? I think that's where we start. I think when we get to the point where we're doing matchmaking on, chicken parm, things of that level of detail, it is not to say that that is not in our roadmap of ambitions. I think there's a lot of lower hanging fruit for us.
Hmm.
But certainly that idea of, there's a bunch of people who are enthusiastic about this thing, and they might be interested in knowing about this restaurant here, or this group of restaurants, or this neighborhood. That is definitely something that we're very excited about.
Yeah, and I guess, on that point, when it comes to building, because you guys are, I guess it would be a bunch of different things that I would fall under the Blackbird. We already talked about the community aspect and the data aspect and the curation aspect perhaps as well. But the thing that's probably most important here is the hardware aspect as well, having the reader in the restaurant, which I suppose would require kind of, feet on bricks, walking around trying to sell restaurants on why they need to put this piece of technology at the front of their restaurant. And then also just the software that comes with, being able to text these diners and having that direct relationship with the diners from the restaurant. I mean, when you put all that together, is the sale to the restaurant owner specific? Like, what has that been like when you're trying to put this in restaurants? Are you starting with ones that you already have? And how do you see it scaling in the way that maybe the Blackbird community could be the one driving some of this in the signups?
It's funny you should ask that, because we have, as the platform has, been in public, kind of beta of sorts for uh, more than 6 months now. We have definitely found that there is a cohort, a segment of our audience that is excited about doing restaurant acquisition for us. I would say we have to figure out exactly how that works, because these are still restaurants, and the last thing we want to do is bombard them with people knocking on their doors. Um, they are short staffed to begin with,
Yeah.
but our ambition is to be in every restaurant on the planet, and we will. And I think it's at some point we will for sure figure out a way to harness our consumer audience to acquire a lot of restaurants. For now, my relationships, our team has lots of relationships that I don't have. We're going more or less door to door and saying, "Look, we think you'd be a great restaurant for Blackbird. Here's how it works. What do you think?"
Yeah, and those I assume might be the low-hanging fruits. But anytime you're kind of pairing a Web 2 kind of project with a Web 3 kind of project, I assume that there are ideas, things floated that get shot down, whether it's because the one side thinks that's a crazy idea or the other side thinks it might not work. Because, I mean, we've even seen it here, right? I mean, Coinage being kind of the one bridge between degens and people who are just dipping a toe in crypto, maybe about Bitcoin, but you don't know how anything else works. That's kind of where we fit into the media ecosystem. And one thing might work for degens, but it might not work for a mainstream audience. I mean, like, have there been things that maybe you and the team have looked at, tested? Maybe you're building into the roadmap where you say, look, this is a tough one to straddle.
I mean, look, again, like we're not the sort of you know Web3. We're not the crypto purists killer app, and we're okay with that. And if we piss off some people who are upset because we're not a pure self custody environment, we're not 1 zillion% on chain with every piece of information that comes through our system, we're okay with that. Again, this is about restaurant consumers creating relationships with restaurants. So I think a lot of that stuff that you'd sort of see way out on the bleeding edge from a consumer adoption perspective is not it's not really on our radar. I
Mm-hmm.
will say that, as I alluded to, certainly the population of the crypto audience that understands the potential value of getting a lot of token early, um, those folks have definitely showed up, and we've had to put some kind of limits on how much token you can earn in what period of time. We appreciate them and we appreciate their enthusiasm, but we also have to, like I said, build a business that works for both restaurants and consumers, and broadly for the Blackbird ecosystem over a long period of time. So we've had to sort of quell their enthusiasm a little bit when it comes to harvesting fly, but otherwise, we're building a pretty down the middle product, at least with respect to sort of where it sits on the Web 2, Web 3 spectrum.
Yeah, I've been interested to see that too, because again, I think your project has been much talked about in both circles, right? And New York Times, whether it's there or even Web3 publications like ours, it's drawn attraction from both sides, users from both sides,
Yeah.
and I think it's also maybe signaling a turning point too. I think anyone who's focused more on the Web3 side has seen this enthusiasm around account abstraction and moving away, putting Web3 in the background, so you might not even know, that these membership passes. A, you definitely don't know they're built on base. B, you definitely don't know that they're NFTs.
Yeah.
I mean, is that an active effort on your part? Like, we also don't call our things NFTs so much as they are membership passes to let people own coinage and weigh in on who we should be covering, which is how we came to today and having you on the show. Like, there are things like that. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on just the word NFT.
I'm neutral on it. I'm concerned about educating customers in the most effective way possible in the shortest amount of time. So if NFT is a word that resonates, great. If it doesn't resonate, we probably shouldn't use it. I think we've talked a lot about the vocabulary: membership, pass, NFT, card. So far, we've been using membership more than anything else. We may come up with something else, but it's in the name of sort of usability and easy understandability. Um, Look, in some contexts, you call it an NFT, you skip a lot of steps. In our
Hmm.
context, you call it an NFT, you have to add an explainer. So it doesn't work for us to lead with the fact that they're NFTs. Um, like I said, it would in other contexts. For us, our standard for shipping product and for using copy is this the easiest way to explain what we're doing to a consumer audience?
Yeah, and I think that that again is kind of the big unlock when you have people. I was just chatting with someone who was at Alchemy last night, and the idea of kind of, I don't want to say onboarding and bringing people into the Web3 world, because that makes it sound much more like a cult than I'm ever comfortable discussing. But the idea of someone going to a restaurant, sitting down, putting their phone on the table or scanning when they check in, and then everyone else is like, "What the hell are you doing there?" And then they get a free drink, or in this case, 6 free drinks for everyone at the table, and everyone saying, "Wait a minute, how do I get to be in the super cool club that you're in?" And it triggers each interaction triggers discussions like this. And so, I mean, what have you seen in terms of that growth? Because that's the big unlock for, I think, anyone who works in Web3, is the network effects. We talked about cold start problems, but the network effects at play here, and
Yeah.
like how you've seen, like to your point, it doesn't matter if you're Web3 or Web2, you're using our thing, and you're delighted by the fact that you get freebies. So, I mean, what have you seen in terms of that being the key, I guess, secret sauce for Blackbird to get to where it is now?
I think it's a huge part of our success. You use our NFC chip, you tap in, you've got your first pass, your first membership, your first NFT, whatever it is, in a matter of 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Um, and it's easy as could be. We're about to start spinning up a wallet for you in the background, and we'll start to put things in there for you. But again, the 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 least amount of friction is the right amount of friction when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
consumer product. If you noticed, if you're a history buff of sorts and you want to think about the early days of Resy, the first thing we did as an attack on Open Table is, as a hard rule, you had to have a reservation confirmed in 2 taps in the app. And that is all about our view around what makes consumer product magical. So we have similar ideas, similar sort of philosophy at Blackbird when it comes to, um, you know, how we design and ship product.
Yeah, which restaurant would you say is making that most simple or using it in the most exciting way? And I know that might be a question that's like picking your favorite child, but I will say, in the idea of like a punch card, a lot of people are familiar with that. My barber has a punch card. Every fifth haircut, you get 20% off. But I mean, why put it on chain? And what restaurants may be doing the most interesting thing?
So I do love all my children the same. Um, and they are all doing wonderful things, and I enjoy and get thrilled by checking in all over the place. But I would say, just sort of to look at some different use cases. Certainly, Upside Pizza, they have a paid Pizza Club membership as their flagship product. You get for $200 a year, you get a slice a day for a year. And in addition to that, you get access to some cool events and maybe some merch. You really get to be on the inside at probably the coolest pizzeria downtown, or one of the top three for sure. Uh,
One of the top three on the app that we're partnered with here.
and so that's a great one. Um, we're actually talking to them. They're opening a winter concept in a couple weeks that we're going to be partnering with them on. It's going to be super exciting, and there's going to be kind of a punch card um, uh, implementation for that venue. Some restaurants like Anton's and Nats in the West Village are using Blackbird just to create better connectivity, to create more regulars, to incentivize the behavior of coming back over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
That's about free cookies and free drinks. And both of those restaurants are also places where you can actually redeem fly. And so that's another sort of hook here. At those two, they are early testing partners for us on Fly Redemption.
Sure.
Obviously, Gertrude, where they basically funded the opening of the restaurant, with essentially friends and family access. Another kind of cool use case. Those guys raised 55 grand just by saying, "Hey, why don't you give us a little money up front, and you get to go to friends and family." There's a lot of exciting stuff that people are doing with the platform.
Yeah, and I just to repeat what you said there. I'm pretty sure you said $200 and you can get a slice every day, which by my math sounds phenomenal. Sounds like a great deal.
You might have
Um,
to factor in the price of a gym membership, but it's a really good deal.
yeah, true. I mean, I do it to my body anyways, and I still pay for it. But that's founder life, baby. But no, I mean, when you think about, I suppose like the reason why, and this was the second part of the question, is why you'd put it on chain. And I mean, what we've done in terms of having more than 6,500 NFT holders in the Coinage community, being able to steer our content, vote on things, and co-own what we're building too. Again, solving the cold start problem, more people share our content because they have an incentive to. But also, the thing that I've discovered is just the ability to plug into other existing communities on chain has been wild in the sense that, we're able to kind of plug into Lens, if it's that, the social platform, and work, basically provide benefits for our community because it's on chain with other communities. And I think
Yeah.
what I gather is you guys are kind of enabling that for restaurants that would never have the ability to do this, never put in the R&D, or frankly don't have the funds to even try. And so, I mean, how do you see it scaling? I know you have the Fly token, but what do you see in terms of, I guess, letting a restaurant like that start to tap into, doesn't even need to be a restaurant, but start to do partnerships with things that might be related. Let's say if it's a smoothie company, we know you care more about your body than Zach does by eating pizza every day, but there are other partnerships you could enable. And that to me is the exciting piece of Web3, but I don't know if that's something that Blackbird cares so much about in the long run. I mean, how do you extrapolate?
Yeah, I think you'll start to see us next year sort of articulate some of those kinds of benefits that you're describing. We do very much believe in that as a real source of value for restaurants and something that we can unlock for restaurants. Um, I think that that starts to come into the picture for us next year.
And then when it comes to, I guess, the community, right? When we talk about that, it's interesting too, because I think part of the reason why we founded Coinage was trust in media is at an all-time low. I'm going to try and get at your sense of, being a founder of Eater and your ideas of the media. Because I think, I just saw a meme the other day. It was a picture of the Michelin Man, and it was like, why is this the guy that chooses who the best restaurants are? And it kind of made me laugh. I know it's obviously not exactly, memes are never that concise. But when it comes to, I guess, community curation and things like that, one of the other projects we're looking at here is in the food space, and the idea of curating everyone's opinions in New York. It's probably the most hotly contested thing. If you ask a New Yorker what their favorite restaurant is, they might fight you to the death and try and defend it. And I think it's kind of one of the cool cultural pieces of what makes New York, because I've been here 10 years and haven't even gotten close to hitting them all. But when it comes to community curation, I mean, trusted community curation, I think, is an important piece when you're really democratizing and letting everyone weigh in on it rather than maybe a select few of food reviewers who might have close relationships with these restaurants and or founders. And so I'm curious what you look at in terms of what Web3 in this application might do to awards, restaurant curation, and spotlighting some of the spots that don't get a chance.
Look, I mean, I think that's probably a little ways out. Like, I think that's like two ticks out, two ticks out on the sort of horizon, so to speak. Just because I think we just need lots more activity and both consumer and restaurant activity on chain for there to be like a real data set there to start to play
Mm-hmm.
with. Um, Certainly, like you do think about credibility, you do think about context and experience when it comes to lending credence to an individual critic. My sort of standard has always been does this critic or does this writer or does this influencer have the context to make the calls that they're making, and are they doing so in a consistent way? Is the filter a consistent filter over and over again, even though if I don't agree with their take, am I consistently not agreeing with their take? If I like their take, am I consistently agreeing with it? When we disagree, is it sort of okay because I knew that was where they were going to go with a particular take? That consistency those two things, consistency and context, are the absolute two things that matter more than anything else when it comes to understanding and sort of evaluating an individual source, an individual
Hmm.
sort of the efficacy of a curator. Um, so we obviously can use Web3 to sort of address some of those, like what you're going to have in terms of a Blackbird guest history is potentially a really interesting dining fingerprint of sorts to then say, look, I've been to these 800 restaurants. You might want to trust my opinion on this. Um, or not, right? So that is definitely something that, you could see being interesting down the road. We are very excited about what the Blackbird check-in data set starts to look like pretty soon, so
Hmm.
that you can just kind of see based on aggregate Blackbird check-in activity, at least certainly the velocity around activity at places, right? Which restaurants are lighting up that weren't lighting up a week ago? Which restaurants are lighting up less than they were a month ago, a year ago? There's a ton of signal in that data set. But I think that's curation is curation. Like when you think about Michelin and its track record of success, for me, Michelin is not interesting. It's not the kind of eating, the kind of dining that I like, that I tend to gravitate to. But it is to an extent consistent. Similarly with 50 Best, that list. Look, you could not. There's certain things that they've done over time to they've created rules that I think are too cute for their own good, and they've gotten
Hmm.
in their own way in certain ways. But at least kind of like a 50 Best restaurant, you kind of know what you're getting there, right? You're kind of getting this like super duper polished, often multi-course, often very sort of story driven, extravagantly articulated version of a restaurant. So if you like that kind of thing, that's a pretty good list.
Yeah.
um, I think Pete Wells is a guy who's been at the job now for, I think, a long time, certainly a decade or more. I think it's more than a decade. It feels like a very long time. It might be closer
Yeah.
to 20 years. Um, you know what that guy's take is going to be. There are people that were up in arms about the Tatiana 3-star review. I thought, first of all, I think Tatiana is spectacular, and that review was exactly right. But if you're following along, if you think about what Pete Wells likes and what he doesn't like and what he values, you saw that review coming from 17 miles away, right? So that's good. And when you don't, and when the reviewer is all over the place, or when the source is all over the place, or when it's a TikToker who's just doing sort of heat seeking, you just have to know that that's junk. You have to know that that's just noise, and you move on. So you got me rambling on about critics.
No, but
But
I think it's important, and I feel like that's the point, right? Like you said, consistency, respect, and a resume, right? Like, and it's the same thing we do in our personal lives, right? It's like if your friend is notorious for recommending some trash food, at some point you say, "I'm not going to listen to you anymore," and that's normal and that's human. And I think that that's kind of the piece that's interesting when you think about community curation. Is like, is there a way to weight more heavily people who have the resume? And as we're putting our community together in this endeavor, it's certainly top of mind in really figuring out who has the resume and expertise in whatever genre it may be.
yeah, well, look, I mean, I think that's a great point, and I think inevitably where we're heading with community curation is in any community there's going to be 3% recommenders and 97% listeners,
Hmm.
and that's the way it should be. There's a couple people in every group who know what they're talking about, and everyone else is lucky to be along for the ride. And when you start to listen to the people who don't know what they're talking about, you waste a lot of time going to really mediocre restaurants.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we've kind of done here at Coinage too. It's a lot of Web3 founders. The co-founder of Netflix is, basically a tier, a top tier in terms of who has the most voting power and governance rights with what we're doing at Coinage, which I think is important to the structure. I'm all for giving power to the people, and I think even the people would agree having the most power normally seared by the people who are most I guess, experienced in the matter definitely tends to help with the project. And I won't give too much alpha away on what we're doing on the food space and the projects and people we have attached to that. But I'm glad we align on that. I think I promised that we would come back to this $24 million round, and I want to definitely talk about what it does to your team at Blackbird in terms of how it throws fuel on the fire for growing this project, because I think that's important when it comes to not only a utility-based project, but one that actually now has the firepower to really start doing some interesting things. And again, I have a lot of respect for what you're doing here. And I think, when people try and compare it to other big companies that have also gotten VC backing, it's interesting because some people might say DoorDash was great from the beginning. And now what are they doing for restaurants? Is it any different pre-pandemic, post-pandemic? Are they perhaps becoming a company that's actually distancing the restaurant from their diners and fans because now there's this technology company sitting in the middle? I mean, how do you start to look at the longer roadmap for Blackbird and how maybe you would say we're different than a DoorDash or we're similar to a DoorDash as you see it growing?
I think you're going to expect from us, as a fundamental rule, we're not going to get between the restaurant and the guest. We're not going to sell the guest back to the restaurant over and over and over again. We would note about the restaurant industry, one of the problems, if you look at the restaurant industry, if you look at the restaurant industry as an economy, right? It's $1 trillion economy in the US alone. The individual restaurant is a net importer. That's why there's a problem. They're buying their customers, they're importing customers over and over and over again. So, and that, look, I don't think it's 100% evil. I think companies like DoorDash need to clean certain things up, and they can be overall, contributors and there can be productive participants in the restaurant industry. I do think they need to clean some things up in terms of this exact thing, which is that restaurants should be entitled to their customers every single time without having to pay for them. So I think you're going to see that as a fundamental rule at Blackbird. And over time, the other thing you can expect is that we're going to partner with the industry to help them get stronger as businesses. We strongly believe here that in order for Blackbird to be successful, the restaurant industry has to get better at making money. Every restaurant has to be a little bit more profitable. And if we can't do that, then frankly, there are some dark times ahead. But the good news is we are optimistic about our ability to change the tide in restaurants. And so we think the future of restaurants is very bright.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Everyone always talks about the margins being so slim in the food business. And I mean, A, I suppose, why do you think that is? And B, how do you see restaurants starting to edge closer to making money? Is it really leaning in on the community aspect, their highest paying customers? I mean, what do you see as the secret?
I mean, they're paying look, the average restaurant's profit margin today is less than 5%. It was 20% 20 years ago,
Wow.
18, 20%. That's a huge decline and a precipitous one. And that's why is that happening? That's happening because there's more hands in the till. The individual restaurant has less leverage. The big monster gatekeepers like Uber Eats and DoorDash, um, and Google and Amex and MasterCard. Some of them are contributors and behaving well, and some of them are not behaving well. So one thing we have to fix is that everyone has to behave a little bit better. I'm very proud of if you look at since Resy started, I'm very proud of the fact that the average restaurant, whether they're using Resy or another platform, is paying less for that software today than they were when Resy started. So that's good change. That's good change, right? Now, obviously, that change, that decrease in cost, didn't offset a lot of other new costs because my profit margin continued to go down. But we're
Hmm.
taking a similar approach here in that we're saying we have to figure this out. We have to be collaborative with restaurants, or we all ought to pack it up and go home.
Yeah, and I mean, I think obviously, as a customer of some of these restaurants that have shut down, you never want to see that either. And I think everyone kind of rallied around their restaurants in the pandemic, which was really cool to see. Was this idea of like, what can I do? Because I want to help. It was kind of like the Patreon model met of like the restaurant model, where it's like, I know I normally go here and I pay money for the food I'm eating, but I also want to help contribute even more because I like this space. I don't want to see it go away in the pandemic. People were buying gift cards basically as loans. It was a weird thing. But I mean, like, what did that show you?
It was a huge signal and a huge sort of part of the genesis of Blackbird to see that exact behavior. I'm glad you brought that up. That behavior to me is is the entire reason we're so enthusiastic about the future, because given the opportunity, customers will show up for their favorite restaurants. They will spend more, they will show up more often, they will do whatever restaurants ask them to do. It turns out in that pandemic moment, as an anomaly, restaurants figured out how to say, pay us money for this other thing, whether that be tomato sauce or T-shirts, or I love this example from LA. The Spare Room sent out, did like a Mad Libs, like a Spare Room Mad Libs, like all this stuff, whatever it was. Masks. Adamix collaborated on a line of cool, chic masks, and because they had nothing else to do, they had no other options. Restaurants said, you should buy some other stuff from us. And consumers said, cool, we're down. Let's do it. And that was really exciting. But obviously, as a pandemic, um, you, you know, uh, gave way to restaurants reopening, and business sort of returned to the way it was, restaurants had less time to do that and sort of returned to old habits and started relying on muscle memory that they'd built over obviously decades. But I love that as a signal for what's ahead.
Yeah, I think that's an important piece of all this. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you also, as a founder who's maybe talking to a lot of the same investors you've been talking to, maybe we could have started this too with the pitch on why Blackbird is necessary right now. When you look at the overall market and pairing all the things we just talked about, whether it's the actual diners going to the restaurants themselves, the tech stack, the idea of making this a whole better process for everybody to get at that win-win-win. I mean, what's your most concise kind of pitch that you took to investors to score this round to say, look, this is the solution to the problem we saw in the pandemic?
The pitch is, the restaurant industry is humongous. It's made up of individual restaurants that are making a tiny bit of money. The restaurant industry, individual restaurants have no leverage. But if we can build some solutions that give them leverage, that harness their power, that unlock customers for them individually, then we can build a humongous business. There's a history of huge businesses being built, technology businesses being built in the restaurant industry, credit cards, the delivery companies. There's a some of the POS. There's huge businesses that have been built here, so investors understand the opportunity, and I think that our observations and our strategy and our roadmap in these times has really resonated.
Yeah, I find it to be similar in the content space too, just to pair it, which I think, your background certainly is in content. It's been the same thing with kind of content creators, is the idea of like the Mr. Beast. There's one Mr. Beast maybe for every, I don't know, 50,000 other content creators who are trying to get there and trying to find other ways to stretch their own value to get some money flowing in the door too. And it's like, I don't know, the model that we've been able to put out has been interesting to see now as we apply it to other niches, and food being one of those certainly, and how you can create more trusted outcomes and ones that help creators. I think that to me is the exciting piece of Web3, is really like what you just said around the pandemic, and like the idea of there was unextracted value that was sitting there, and you saw it with the restaurants and saying, there's value that we are not capitalizing on. And finally, there's a way to do it, whether it's with a membership pass or an NFT. And so many people have just left that on the table.
1,000%.
Yeah, but it's been quite fascinating to see all this. Anyways, there are only a few other questions I think I had for you, because you had a huge, this has been an hour, and I appreciate you for taking the time to chat with us today. There is, I guess, a question that our community had for someone like you, because if I do remember my notes correctly, you went to Horace Mann. I would say maybe it's fair to say you're a New York guy through and through. When it comes to the food scenes, city to city, I know you guys mostly built here in New York to start. Now you're expanding to others. Is there any other city that can challenge New York as the top food city in the U.S.?
Oh yeah, I mean, look, you don't want to think about the comparison of New York to other cities. You don't want to think about comparing LA to New York. You don't want to think about comparing LA to Austin. Every medium to large size city in the US now is a great restaurant city. That's happened over the last 20 years. So like, stop comparing, figure out, where are you going? What are the cool restaurants? Where do you want to eat? There's good places everywhere. I think that's, like I said, I think that's happened over the last 20 years or so. I love eating in LA. I love eating in Charleston, which is a city that punches way above its weight class in terms of food. I love eating across a bunch of cities in the southern part of the United States. My wife is from Houston, so that's a city I've explored in the last 10 years. There's great food everywhere. This is the thing about the New York restaurant scene. Because I do, of course, it does come back to New York, and of course, my favorite restaurant city is New York. But this is the thing you have to understand about New York as a restaurant city. We've been a restaurant city for 100 years, maybe 200. We've been doing restaurants in New York for a very long time as compared to every other city in the US. That's why it looks easier here because we've got more reps. There's more restaurants, there's more restaurant energy, there's more restaurant DNA, there's more restaurant context here. It doesn't mean the city today is better. I think it's why we always come back to New York as the original restaurant city. And, a lot of the restaurants, like the restaurants that open in New York like I said, more than 100 years ago, they have shaped the restaurant culture of the US. Like we think about food inspiration, we think about sort of cuisines other than kind of American cuisine coming to different cities, like kind of penetrating deeper into the US. That's not what New York is contributing. What New York is contributing is the form factor of restaurants, the hospitality of restaurants, the way a restaurant feels when you walk in. That's the comparison. And I do think, and you can come at me for this, it's cool, I get it. I do think that New York does that a little bit better. I think there's some examples. There's kind of examples in the sort of, let's call them 10 or 20 restaurants in a certain city, in a big city, that you get that like super high wattage, incredibly high level finish on a restaurant. But come to Raf's on Elizabeth Street. That's a new restaurant that's less than a year old. Come to Raf's and give me the comp for that somewhere else in the US. There's just a polish on the finish and the hospitality at the highest end in New York
Yeah.
that is still kind of developing in other cities.
Okay. Yeah. No, I mean, listen, I'm not going to challenge you because I've lived here for almost 10 years now. I'm in a weird existential crisis where I don't really know if I'm a Californian or a New Yorker anymore. So it's a touchy subject. So I'm going to move on. But to push that further, because like you said, it matters in terms of resume, it matters in terms of palate. And we can go a lot of places to ask a lot of people what their best dish ever is. But, we got you on the show today, Ben. We got you, the man who built Resy, who built Eater, and is now building Blackbird. I ask you, sir, what is the best dish ever in your mind?
I mean, that's really not a fair question. The best dish ever is like so contextual. It's all about memory. Um, I mean, you know what? I'm gonna say the steak arpois at Bistro Paul Bert outside Paris,
Oh, it's not even in New York. It's not even in New York.
because I think there's like the best dish ever in New York depends on what your mood is.
That's
I mean,
fair. That is extremely true.
you wake up on a certain day, maybe it was a late night for you. You know what the best dish ever is? Slice of upside pizza. If you're under the weather and like you just need to feel good, you know what the best dish ever is? The broth at Anton's.
Yeah.
So there's too much context for me to say one dish, but the steak arpois at Bistro Paul Bert is memorable and worth a trip. And in this moment of weakness, you got me to say it. There you go.
I mean, well, we also said he's a big New York food guy, and then the recommendations in Paris, which is a little far from me right now, and I'm short on airline miles. So if I were to say, if it was best dish ever from Ben in New York, I got a friend visiting, yeah? Friend's coming into town, he's only got time for one dish. I say, all right, what's his best dish? What do we send him to?
Honestly, I'm sending him. So I'm not trying to avoid your question. I want to answer it completely and as best as I can. I don't think New York is about a best dish. You're not going to a restaurant in New York for a best dish. Honestly, like the pizza at Upside, the pizza at Scars, the pizza at F&F in Brooklyn, incredible. A single like the dish that I always crave if I haven't had it in 6 months is the cavatelli with sausage at Frankie's in Carroll Gardens. I mean,
Yeah, our producer right now is flipping the table right now, so he agrees with you on that one. He
that
agrees
is
with you over there.
for a contender. The You know, the black label burger at Minetta. I mean, there's dishes that are like categorical top five dishes.
Yeah.
Again, like I don't know. I'm not sending somebody to a restaurant in New York to try one dish. I'm saying like, you want to really understand like an OG Brooklyn restaurant, you go to Frankie's 457.
Yeah. No, I mean, listen, we could talk for hours on this, and I think that's why it's an interesting thing to start to maybe inch closer to as we've built something in the crypto
Probably
news niche.
calzone. I mean, you know, there's like, you know, dumplings. There's lots of answers to this question. Lots and lots.
Yeah, we could literally spend hours here, but I appreciate you chatting to us, man. I hope we can continue these conversations as you guys build out what you're working on, because like I said, I think it's one of the coolest projects in Web3 right now. Everyone should be checking out Blackbird. Everyone should be using it if you haven't already. And, you know, a lot of respect to you, Ben, for what you've built, and congrats to the team. But thank you again for coming on Coinage. Hope to have you back soon, man.
This was awesome. I'll come back anytime.
Awesome. All right, Ben Leventhal there, the founder of Blackbird, Resy, and Eater. That'll do it for us here on this episode of Coinage. Thank you again to everybody. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. We'll see you again soon.